Hello Laravel friends, this week I'd like to show you some new PHP attributes. We will talk about currency, and the man himself, Taylor, provides one single command to rule it all. Let's go. First, we will start by talking about the number helper in Laravel. I really hope you already know the number helper in Laravel, which is pretty awesome. It has a lot of features. And here we're using the currency method in order to see 1000 with the currency, and with the default, this looks like this. So what we now can also check, which is new, we can get the default currency, which you can see is US dollars. And we also can get the default local, which is English. So what we can do now here is we can say that we want to use a different local. For example, let's use German, which is mine. And now if I use the number helper again, let's just use format here, and let's just use 1000. Now this looks like this. Again, if we change this back to English, you can see now we have a dot here, and in English we have this comma here. So this is different here. That's why it's good to know which local we're using. But also we can do this now also for use currency. Let's say here we want to use euros, and let's try now currency again. And let's also make sure that we finish those statements here. And here we are. We now can see that we are using euros, but this is now at the beginning of the number, which we actually don't use here in Europe. So let's change this, use local to German. And now you can see, if I finish the statement again, which I always forget, now this is here at the end of the statement, and we have here the dot and then here the comma. This is how we do this here in Europe. So yeah, these all three methods were already given. So this was already working before, but now what you can do is you can check the default currency and the default local just to make sure what you are currently using. Have fun. Thank you, Ryan. Next, there is a new PHP attribute for dealing with custom collections. I'm pretty sure you know that for all your eloquent models, like here in this example podcast, when you try to get this from the database, let's take all of the podcasts that I have in my database, what you get back is a collection. So this is an eloquent collection. And this is nice because there are a lot of methods that we can use in our collections, like give me the first one, and here many more, which is pretty cool. But sometimes you may have the need for some more custom methods for your specific eloquent collections for a specific model, for example, like for this podcast model. And then there is something that you can do as well. So what we can define here is a new collection method. And here we're going to return this new collection that we want to use instead. And I have already prepared a new podcast collection. And I'm providing in here all the models, and here, of course, the return type is now our podcast collection. All right, let's try it out first. So we're going to get all of our podcasts, and again, now you see that we are now getting back a podcast collection. And now on this collection, I have a new method which is called, or maybe let's first check. I can still get the first podcast. I can use all the methods that are available for the base collection, but I can also use some custom ones. And I have one which is called get top rated to get the top rated podcast. Yeah, so this works as well. Why I love Inertia 2.0 was rated with 10, which is the best. Perfect. So this again makes sense if you want to use some custom collections. This is a pretty simple example, so you probably would do this inside a query, but maybe to get the top-rated podcast, you need to do some complex logic in order to do this, and then sometimes it makes more sense to do this on the collection side, and then a custom collection comes in very handy. This was already working before very well like this, but now there's a new way we can use this, which I think is pretty cool, because I'm a big fan of PHP attributes, and this one is called CollectedBy, and here I provide now my podcast collection class like this. So collect my podcasts by this collection, and if we try this out now again, you can see this still works the same. My custom method still works, and here I still get back my podcast collection. So yeah, this is a new way to use a custom collection for your eloquent models. Thank you, Andreas. And we got another PHP attribute for dealing with route parameters. In this example, we have here this route where we allow to update a specific podcast, which we provide here through route model binding. And if we go to the controller, you can see we're just running the update method on the podcast, provide the data from the request. And yeah, this should do this. Let's check out our test here. I have here one. It updates a podcast. So what we're doing here, we're acting as a specific user. We're logging in. We are creating a podcast so that we have one with some specific data. And then we're going to call this specific route with the podcast for route model binding and the updated data. We make sure that we get a successful response back. And then we make sure also that the data is correct. Let's run this. And this test is passing, which is great. Okay, cool so far. But back inside our controller, as I mentioned, we have here access to the podcast. And yeah, this is actually quite nice because we also wanted to make sure that only the user of the podcast can update the podcast. So this means here we have access to the podcast instance and also to the user ID. And then we could check that this is equal to the logged in user. But yeah, mainly this is maybe not the best place to do this. And this is why we often use form requests. And I've also created one which called update podcast request. Let's take a look what this does. Authorizing here just, we let this as true first, and then we have some rules here for updating our podcast. So this means instead of this here, let me just add a variable here. So let's call this form request. And what we're doing here now is we are using this form request. And from the form request, we get the validated data. Okay, let's run our test again. And yeah, this is still passing. Okay, perfect. But back here, I mentioned that I wanted to make sure that only specific users are authorized to run this process updating a podcast. So what we can do here is we need to get now the podcast instance, which we have easily access here through route model binding here in the controller, but not so easy anymore now in this form request. So we can still get it through the route helper here, route, and we're looking for the podcast parameter. And then we make sure that the user ID is equal to the currently logged in user ID like this. Let's run this. Our test is still passing. Just to be sure, let me show you that it does not work anymore. If I provide here anything else, yeah, now this is failing. Okay, we made sure that this works. But as I told you, we don't have any easy access anymore to this route model binded podcast instance like we have in the controller. So now with this new contribution that I want to show you, we have better access to that. So let me show you. Something which we already had was the current user, which we can also provide here, user model, and then let's say authenticated user. So this was already working, so we can already use this here instead of doing this manually, right? And now something new which we also have is the RouteParameter PHP attribute. So now we just say we want to get the route parameter, which is called podcast, which is of the podcast instance, like this. And now we can change this here to podcast. All right, let's run the test again, and you can see our test is still passing. But now we were using those two new contextual attributes, that's how they are called, for getting the current user and for getting a route parameter, which is now way easier in classes like, for example, this form request, where we don't have access to the route model binded podcast like we do have in the controller. So yeah, have fun with this new attribute. I think that's a cool addition to the framework. Thank you, Bastian. And last, here's the new composer script Taylor Otwell himself will use all the time, and you probably too. In a new Laravel application, when you go to your composer.json file, and let's just scroll down here, you can see that we have here a new composer script. So what this does, it disables the process timeout for composer, because we will have here a long running task. And then here we are running some scripts at the same time. So what do we have? We are starting up our server. We are using QListen. We are starting PHP artist and Pale to see some logs. We run our Vite environment, and here we also provide some names to all those different processes. Okay, so what does this do? Let's try this out together. Composer run dev. Here we go. Let's take a look what we have here. So now all these different processes are running here in this one terminal window. We have our logs here for Pale. We have our queue, which is listening. We have Vite here. We have our server running, and Vite was already here updated, so we have some info here. Okay, let's try out to go to our welcome screen. Take a look, and we can see here from the server we have some information here in our terminal that we visited this page. All right, so what happens if I change something like here, Laravel video about a new script? Let's take a look. And you can see here a lot of things are happening. Vite is reloading, our server is reloading, and we see all those logs here. So this is pretty cool because here are now, as I mentioned, several scripts here running at the same time. Everything that you probably need while developing, and everything here is inside this one script, and everything that you need is being shown here. So let's try something else. Let's go back here, and now let's log an info message. Here we go, let's take a look. And it was shown an error because I wasn't that fast in returning this. But yeah, if we scroll down here after all these errors about me not finishing my script here, now we see our info command here as well, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we tackled a few of our services here again. The one thing missing here is the queue, so let's try this as well. I think I can also do this right here. Let's dispatch a new process podcast job, and it needs a podcast. So let's just get the first one. Let's try this out. I think it should be running automatically already, because Vite is reloading, and we can see here on the queue. By the way, here on the left, you always see the log from which service this comes from. This comes from the queue. Our job has been processed here 2 times because Vite was reloading this page here. I think this is now something that a lot of you people will use daily while doing your local development. Just run this one script here, and the most important services are running here. You see them at the same time. You have some different color output here to distinguish between those different processes. And I think that's pretty cool. So please remember we now have this new composer script, composer run dev. Thank you, boss. That's it for this week. Let me know which of the known features you like the most in the comments, and see you the next time. Bye.